Good morning. Good morning. I hope your day is grand. Good morning. Good morning. It brings you what you plan. Good morning. Good morning. I hope your day is bright. Good morning. Good morning. May all be alright. Good morning, good morning. Love and light shine through. Good morning, good morning. May love give and get to you. Good morning, everybody. I'm trying to see. Somebody suggested to try a VPN, so I'm trying a VPN to see if that will actually work. We'll see if maybe it will actually stay up today and I won't have it crash out on me 4 or 5 times in an hour. Maybe we can actually conversate. Well, I mean, it's a little one-sided in its lecture form, but still there. I'm over on YouTube as well, and I am pulling. It is very irritating. I have websites that I'm pulling up on YouTube so that you can follow along. These are websites. Oh, is it causing you problems today? I'm trying to eradicate the problems from yesterday. So I just started with the VPN, so I've never used it before. So if it's causing you problems, please let me know. Okay, awesome. Nope. Dog issues. Bran, come here.
Sorry.
You're fine.
1 moment. Love you.
Love you too. Bran, come here. Sorry, that sounded testy. It was not meant to be. I was more testy with trying to get the dog here. Saga, she's in her room.
Love you.
Love you too, baby. So we're going to see if it works today, and if it does, then we'll be using this from now on to maybe try and get through. We are over on YouTube as well, and over on YouTube, I have my website up that I compile bibliographies, links to sources so that you can find some of the information that I'm giving you. I do like to always point out that this website is made to be a landing pad and a jumping off point for you. I'm not going to give you KYA means thousands of years ago. Yes, 10,000 years ago. So I'm not like giving you the whole enchilada. I'm giving you little pieces, right? So that you can take those little pieces and you can dig deeper. Knowledge is one of those things that curiosity drives it, right? Your curiosity, how much you want to know about it, how much you want to be involved in it. That kind of really drives how much knowledge you actually take in a lot of the times for most people. And so I want to make sure that you're doing your own research. We're talking here about how to research and how to make sure that an article, actually has some weight and some basis, as well as how to find more information on things quite frequently. And I'll probably go over it a little bit today as well as we're talking. But I want to just clarify that the website is always just a jumping off point for you. It's not meant to give you everything. It's meant to give you a place to start at so that you can find more. We'll go over all of it. Absolutely. So, we're actually at a pretty high count starting, which we haven't been for a couple of weeks just because of the way everything's working, which kind of tells me that the VPN is working. Though I do have to state that I have seen it lag a little bit more for me, which it doesn't always lag for me. So it'll pop down for me, but it won't do this kind of glitch in my face, which might actually be disturbing for the Widda. But I do want to, since we do have, right, I can stay up, we're good, even if it's annoying. I do usually talk about something in the beginning or once we get to a large amount of people in here. And so we're at a point where we're over 50. And so I'm going to go ahead and state a couple of things as I'm getting into this. My name is Sarah. I am a Widda. A Widda is the oldest etymology of the word witch, that I can find. And what it means is an indigenous scientist. It is somebody who studies the knowledge of the feminine, Wid meaning knowledge, and being a feminine, that lends that femininity to that. So I study knowledge of creation, how we are, how we got here. I'm an archaeologist and an anthropologist. I have degrees in that in medicine. I'm also a historian and a storyteller and a healer. And I come in here because I have a lot of knowledge that I just want to disseminate, just want to get it out there. I don't think that it should be kept behind a $40,000 a year paywall. And I don't think that it should be gate kept by language. It's really hard to get to a point that you can, understand some of the jargon that comes around when you're talking in scientific articles and scientific terms, right? And so to try and get some of that just kind of boiled down so people can understand just a little bit more, because it's really difficult. I can teach you how race theory has been debunked. Race does not exist. Ethnicity and culture are very vital things that absolutely exist, right? And should always be respected and loved. It is my field that created the theory of race, and it is my field that debunked the theory of race. And we'll probably end up talking about that because we've already, brought up violence being 10,000 years old and Western agriculture, and both of those fall under those concepts. YouTube, I will be back in a second if we have people over there. And again, you can kind of follow along some of this on YouTube. Come on. My dog is barking at me, so I'm going to go outside really quick and get him the ability to go to the bathroom. Come on, little dog. So. Space is a safe space. And if you're not acting safe, that'll be taken care of in my space. I have to get settled again. And what we are doing in here is really just about, like I was saying, giving knowledge to masses, right? If we're going to talk about violence and we're going to talk about Western agriculture, then we're going to talk about the concept of othering. And the concept of othering is a concept that keeps you in check, thinking that your next door neighbor is worse than the government that's trying to harm you, right? Worse than the government that's taking everything from you, right? Good morning, everybody. So on YouTube, I am on my website following along. I have Denny up right now in the article from the National Geographic on Denny, who is a picture behind me, because I thought that that's where we'll get started, kind of go back and forth. And we haven't really talked about Denny in a minute, so I think we're actually going to start there, right? So if you were looking for the violence and the Western agriculture, you just have to stick around for a little bit. Denny is about 90,000 years old. And Denny was a 13-year-old when she died. We know biologically she was female because we haven't found a Y chromosome for her. And so we know also that she carries X from both Denisovan and Neanderthal. And because she carries an X from both Denisovan and Neanderthal, she's a first-generation hybrid of Denisovan and Neanderthal. She is the first we have found that is a hybrid of first generation of these two, or any two species in the DNA. We know that we have Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in us, right? And we know that Neanderthal and Denisovans had our DNA and intermixed with us and had each other's DNA and intermixed. We haven't found any other DNA first generation hybrids We found other things that might be hybrids, or other humans that might be hybrids. But we actually have our first generation hybrids, but we actually haven't DNA tested them or gotten DNA from them because of the way that DNA degrades in the fossil record. And so this is the DNA of the first generation hybrid we have. Denny is 13 years old, as I mentioned, when she died. And she had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. And Denny was 90,000 years ago in Denisova Cave in Russia. And she was found from a thigh bone, a piece about this big, the Denisova Cave in Russia. You might know of the Denisova Cave from Denny's father's name, right? Denisovan. It might be the first time you've ever heard of it, right? Denisova Cave is a cave in Russia where there are literally thousands of fragments of bones on the floor of this cave that show hundreds of years, thousands of years, many cycles of generations of years of living space. That is Neanderthal and Denisovan, and later on Homo sapien, right? It's given us so much information, an entire new species, our first hybrid, and it's where we got our first full genome of Neanderthal. It is working out of there that Svante Pabo, who won a Nobel Peace Prize like a year and a half ago, for this, was able to fully sequence our first ancient genome, our first ancient DNA, using polymerase chain reaction. And in sequencing our first ancient DNA sequence for a full genome of Neanderthal, we're able to finally pinpoint the genetics that we see within Homo sapiens that point to our intermixing with Neanderthal. And later on, it's within this cave that a phalange, a fingertip found, was able to give us our first sight at a whole new species in Denisovan. Now, I haven't been watching the comments very much because we started with quite a bit in here, which tells me that the VPN absolutely is working. And so I'm not actually even sure if we have some mods in here currently. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing out a little bit and making sure that we have some people in here who can make sure that we're not getting crazy. Earth's Children series is a beautiful series, and it got Jean M. all doctorates, honorary doctorates in several different universities. And it's basically a thesis paper, right? It's basically a presentation of knowledge of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens to a board, to a world board, instead of just to, like in Europe, instead of going to school for decades, and focusing with a single person. You do your schooling, but you also do your own research, right? Maybe with a couple of guidances, and then you take that to a board and they judge whether or not you get your PhD. It's not quite like here in the United States. And so with that, Jean M. All's Earth's Children series was essentially, a PhD proposal, a PhD candidacy proposal, and earned her several PhDs. One of them is from my alma mater, where I went to school as well, and I didn't find that out till I was there, which is Portland State University. And it's a really awesome concept. I've been reading Jean M. All since I read Clan of the Cave Bear at 12, right? It was just like, oh! And I have been fascinated with Neanderthals since I can remember. I myself grew up with archaeology and anthropology as being a really primary part of the environment that I was in, because my mother and my grandmother were very into knowing who was before us. And so like the first books I read were books on archaeology and anthropology as I was learning to read. That's how my mother taught me how to read. We were in a lodge in the middle of the woods, a teepee in the middle of the woods in Eastern Washington. And her way of making sure that I could have an education when she had me, or when we were snowed in the middle of the, winter and stuff like that, during when normal school was going, was to ensure that I could read by teaching me from the books that she had around. And I remember the first book that I ever actually learned to read out of, and that would be I don't remember the name of it. I remember what it looked like, but it was the archaeological text conversation around the find in the Vinland find in Nova Scotia. When my brain has 2 or 3 things to do together, it slows down just a little bit, and I apologize for that. So give me just a minute as I'm trying to make sure that I have that I'm maintaining the safety in chat that I promised. So if it gets bad in here, I'll turn off the comments. If I do that, I will have comments open over on YouTube, and I will turn comments back on eventually, right? I believe that asking questions is one of the hugest ways that we're able to conceptualize and understand, right? And since I believe that, it's important to me to make sure that everybody gets a chance to answer questions. Hey, Mia. Awesome sauce. Okay, so I do know that I saw at least one other person I know in here besides Mia that is able to keep a little bit of control out of chat or into chat so that we can make sure. And I'm going to go back through and see. Well, we all evolved the same way. The color of our skin isn't an evolution. It's an adaptation. The real cool thing is the fact that you can adapt, that we've evolved the ability for our skin alleles to not be dependent on genetics, but to be dependent on environment. So the alleles for the color of your skin, there are several, and it is a combination of them, dictate how much melanin is going to be in your skin. And in that dictating of how much melanin is going to be in your skin, because everybody has melanin, it is the way that the melanin is tightly gathered that makes darker, and loosely gathered that makes lighter. And again, or not again, but I always like to mention at this point that lighter and darker are ranges, okay? The alleles that combine to decide how much melanin is present and how tightly it is gathered in your skin have very little to do with your genetics. Oh, did we? Let me try this. Ah, it did freeze on me though. Let me see if I can. Yep. Man, I had so much hope. Like, it seemed like it was going so good. I was really hoping it was working. I did take it and put it directly on instead of, because sometimes when it flips back and forth between the phone internet and the Wi-Fi internet, sometimes when it does that, it will kind of, so I'm hoping I took it off and put it on airplane mode on the Wi-Fi. So maybe I tried Nord because it was like free, and I've for a trial, you know, and I've never used one before, and I don't know, we'll see. I'm not up for paying more for my internet, right? Because that's really what that is. It's just paying more money. So, when let me roll me back where I was. When we're looking at the alleles that are present that dictate what our skin tone is, those are not based so much on genetics as they are based on the environment a woman is in when she is pregnant. They are based on genetics too, right? They are also based on the environment. And the environment will dictate whether or not a child's skin is lighter or darker but it doesn't mean that a child who is in somebody me color go to South Africa. That came out wrong. Somebody my color goes to South Africa and lives outside in the sun, pregnant. I have ancestry there and I have ancestry all over the globe. So with me, this doesn't quite work. So let me say that somebody my color who does not have my ancestry, somebody who is Northern European, goes to South Africa and is pregnant in South Africa. Their child is going to, and they're out in the sun. So this is a couple hundred years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, constantly, their child is going to be a shade or two darker than they are. And then the next generation's child is going to be a shade or two darker, right? This is an adaptation that environmental feature or environmental factors influences. And the ability to adapt our skin like that, to adapt, which is the largest organ of our body, our epidermis is, right? The ability to adapt this amazing organ that you have that provides protection on so many levels to protect you better depending on the environment that you're in is the evolutionary miracle. The evolutionary thing that gives us the ability to make it across the planet. And in every space that we move as a species, that adaptation is the last adaptation, because that adaptation matters the least for our environmental needs. At 10,000 years ago, when Cheddar Man is in Britain, right? Cheddar Man in Britain is extremely dark of skin. The alleles there are representative of sub-Saharan African alleles. They're the same alleles. So we know that Cheddar Man's skin was very dark. And we know that Cheddar Man's very dark skin was in beautiful bright contrast to his bright blue eyes, because the melanin in our eyes had to change before the melanin in our skin changed for us to adapt to Europe's cold, overcast climate, because of the fact that that climate, that cloud cover, is a low light space, and light eyes give you an advantage in a space where you don't have a whole lot of light. They're a low light adaptation, right? Just like speciating in a space that is hot with a lot of sun coming directly down on you frequently causes us to speciate with tightly coiled hair, because of the fact that tightly coiled hair creates a lattice work and it creates a shade that allows wind to blow through, to cool our scalps, to cool our brain. Just like for Neanderthals, they had a large nose that stuck out further, like the whole mid-face prognosis here, sticking out further, creating more sinus cavities and a broader opening, because that's what that larger nose is. We have very narrow openings and they have very wide openings, right? That wider opening gives them the ability to suck that air through all of those conches and pathways and cool, right? The air, or warm the air before it reaches the brain. So these beautiful adaptations are all coming to us from Homo erectus. Homo erectus is our grandfather species or our grandmother species. It is a species that all of their subspecies, all of their children, are who create us in Neanderthal and Denisovan and Homo florensis and Homo luzonensis, Homo naledi, all of these amazing species, right? All of these species coming to us from Homo erectus, these are our cousin species that I refer to. As we're looking, some of these are more of our sibling species than our cousin species, right? And newer studies are trying to, bring forth a proposition that Neanderthal is actually us, that Neanderthal is human, sapien, like just another Homo sapiens, right? So there is evidence that they might not even be siblings or cousins. So as we are dealing with all of those, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. We are, as I was saying earlier, sometimes I have to turn off the comments. It can get bad in here. And if it's not, it's not working very well, we turn them off. I'll turn them back on so that people can ask questions in a little bit. I did see a question that was answered or asked. I did answer this earlier. I am an archaeologist and anthropologist. My specialty or my area of focus comes into with paleoanthropology, which is what we are discussing today, and also the archaeology of Bronze and Iron Age Celts and Celtic and Scandinavian regions. So today, right now, we're talking about paleoanthropology. And in paleoanthropology, we realize there's several other species. Paleoanthropology is an extremely fast-moving subject right now because currently we're making changes almost on a daily, right, to actually find new information about us. Within the last year, we found out that we speciated through what was thought before to be a theoretical method of speciation that nobody had ever done. And last year, we found out that not only did we speciate through convergence, but that Homo erectus speciated through convergence as well. And within the last year, you know, we've we discovered a new species. HLD6 was in the last year. This changed from 6 to 7. We discovered a new ghost species within the last year. That's been within the last couple of months. And those things might change everything about everything within the next 2 or 3 years. HLD6 might upend everything you know. Period. Period, period. About yourself. Might upend everything. Okay. So as we're looking and as we're discussing these things, it's important that we know a few concepts going into it, right? Concepts like the fact that the theory of race was debunked, and concepts like the fact that this alleles for our skin tone are not having to do as much with genetics as they have to do with environment, because our skin tone is an adaptation, is an adaptability thing, right? The melanin present in our skin, you know, has to do with where we are. And the melanin present in our skin is the last adaptation that our body cares about, right? We adapt our hair first. We adapt our eyes first. We, adapt our height, right? Our stockiness, different things like that before we adapt our skin. Because the only people who care about your skin tone is the government, who's trying to make you think that it's your next door neighbor instead of the person on top. So that brings me into another one of my areas of focus, another one of the areas that I look to, right? And it was something that was brought up first, or not by me, but by somebody. And I had wanted to talk about Denny and talk about some of the ghost species and the cousin species, which we did. But let me go ahead and talk about othering, because it's rampant today, right? It's so present. We can't even have a conversation or a lecture or an information dump, right? By somebody who focuses in that field without having a bunch of people trying to find ways to make you hate somebody else instead of understand that the government is the problem, right? Why do I say that violence is 10,000 years old? If you want to follow along on YouTube, it's right up there. And if you want to comment before I turn comments back on, the comments in YouTube are always open and you're more than welcome to comment there. I am going to change really quick where we are at in the bibliography, sorry. Let me see if we're moving to the rise of violence is underneath the bibliography tabs on my website that compiles sources for you guys to be able to use as kind of launching pads for you to launch your own investigation into this information, right? So these are two papers that I have gathered and put on here that you should be able to access. They shouldn't be behind paywalls so that you can then jump into it. And I'm just going to go over some of what they say. Now, I'm sure that there is information that I've gotten in here that are not from that article. And so that article might have different information on that one, right? Like this article isn't going to discuss Sargon, but we're going to discuss Sargon. That's in a book. My books are all in storage right now. So I don't have that book right in front of me, so I can't give you it. But something might be different in there. The other thing about Sargon and about that book is we're going to talk about how Angazal rises around the same time as the rise of violence that you're going to see in the archaeological record. That is what is discussed in this article, right? So you might see some differences in this article. That's okay. That doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It doesn't mean that the article is saying something completely different. It's saying that I might have information that the article doesn't have, or I might be looking at something different than the article isn't. And because somebody who's trying to present you with a bunch of information is not going to just read an article to you, right? They're going to be giving you this paragraph from this article and this paragraph from this article and this paragraph from this article. And then they'll give you a combination of what those things together is conceptualizing, what it is that they're trying to say with those things. And that's actually what you see in most articles. That's the abstract, right? It says, I'm trying to say that when Louis Leakey said that the Calico Hill site in California was 200,000 years old, and Louis Leakey being a foundational anthropologist, maybe we should give him some credit, as we're finding that more and more sites in North America are dating over 100,000 years old, like the Cerruti Mastodon site, right? So Louis Leakey's information is all going to come out of the Calico Hill information, right? And there's going to be many people that I'm going to quote as having said that Leakey was incorrect, because I am saying that they're incorrect. So when you're reading that article later on, if I'm quoting somebody as saying that Leakey is incorrect, you can't come back and say that I'm saying that Leakey is incorrect, because I am saying that their statement is incorrect. You're going to see this in articles. It's a combination. It comes together. It brings many different things, right? That's also why after reading the abstract, you have to read the article and the conclusion to know whether or not you're getting the correct information, because the abstract doesn't frequently give you all the correct info, or it doesn't give you the conclusion. It doesn't give you the knowledge gathered. It gives you what knowledge I'm looking for. It doesn't give you what I found, right? So that's from the conclusion. So when we're talking about that, just be aware. And I don't think actually that is in any of these articles that we're talking about today, but I know that it's been mentioned recently. And so I want to make sure that people understand that. People should understand. Again, I'm here because the more information that you have, the stronger that you are. And information and education are gate kept. They're paywalled, and they're gate kept with the utilization, the use of large language, of abstracts and things that those even with extensive degrees sometimes have to go and Google, right? So when we're looking at that, I want to make sure that that's given. These two articles are talking about the archaeological record. And what they're talking about in the archaeological record is prior to about 10 to 12,000 years ago, we see that there are about 2,000 individuals in the archaeological record prior to 10 to 12,000 years ago. At that time period, of the 2,000 individuals that we have in the archaeological record, we see that 2% of them have things that could possibly be attributed to violence. What does possibly be attributed to violence mean? Possibly be attributed to violence means that if I find a skull whose head has been caved in by a rock, I cannot tell you that somebody welded that rock and hit them on the head, or a cave wall fell and hit him on the head. I cannot tell you how that violence got there, how that injury got there, whether that injury was from a natural cause or whether that injury was from a violent act, right? So this means that they could possibly be attributed to violence. The one that stands out in my mind is roughly 30,000 years ago, we find a spear point in somebody's thigh. Now, this isn't in this article. This is something that I read while I was in school. Spear point in somebody's thigh. The spear point is facing, if this is your hip, this being your body, right? And this is your hip, and this is your thigh. The spear point is kind of doing this. It's kind of a down inward angle, right? Like it's up and down, right? Or up and in, I guess, up and in, right? So as it's coming in, it's coming from an upward angle and it's coming too close to the body, right? So I, looking at this, can think of 3 different ways that this could have lodged in this person's thigh and killed them. Now, this person could have been out on a hunt, and in the interaction with a beast, that person could have twisted or turned, and somebody else coming at could have stabbed them in the leg, right? This could be a hunting accident, right? This person could have gotten in a fight with somebody and gotten stabbed in the leg. Maybe they got really close and hit them down like this, right? This person could have been a flint napper. And this is an accident that happened while flint napping. Because while flint napping, you have a sharp object in your hand, right? Oh, and it did it again. I apologize. Just a reminder, I've been having TikTok issues. If it pauses, I'll be right back. Turn the comments on for just a second. I know it's very frustrating, especially if there's nobody here to tell you that I'll be right back, right? Just so you know, if it goes to pause, I will be right back. I promise you, okay? So you'll know when I'm going to leave. I will be telling you. It'll take me 15 minutes to talk myself out of this place, and I have a whole spiel on how I can prove to you who we are biologically and what that means. So you got to stick around to the end anyways, right? But I promise you, you'll know when I'm leaving because I will tell you on my way out. So I recently had to rehome 3 of my cats because I had a 4th cat and a dog move in. I am a cataholic, but not currently. I only have 2 dogs and a cat right now. So I am going to go ahead and turn the comments back off for a little bit just because, well, I can leave them on. It does seem like it's not like, you know, and it has been off for a minute, so we might be down a few trolls. So I can leave them on for just a little bit and we'll see. And I do believe I have mods in here now. So, and you're fine. I just, I like to keep them on. I like comments. And I like to be able to answer questions. It's just when it becomes unsafe for everybody that I like to make sure that they're also not allowing the unsafe space. Not they, that the trolls are not creating an unsafe space. So when we, like that, just about like that. When we are talking about the rise, there we go. Okay, good, we're good. When we are talking about the rise of violence in the archaeological record, those 2,000 finds that we have before 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years, between 10 and 12,000 years, there's always a between, right? The 2,000 finds that we have, that 2% of violence that we can see, that are 2% of things that we can see that can be attributed to violence, rises substantially at 10,000 years ago. By 10,000 years ago, we see things in the archaeological record that are absolutely, without a doubt, violence. One of the things that we see is that 10,000 years ago, we see a row of roughly 8 people sitting with their hands bound, cross-legged. And we see one of them is a pregnant woman with her hands bound underneath her belly like this, and all of them are hit from behind. This is absolutely violent, right? we see that this rise of violence goes from that 2% possible to 18 to 20% absolute. This is at least a 16% rise, right? And that's if we don't take, because I'm not going to say that there is absolutely no violence. I am sure that there is some threat somewhere that causes people to interact in a negative before this, right? Just because life is life, right? Shit. Somebody could be dressed up with a lion skin over their head and somebody thinks it's a lion and come after them, and that's an act of violence, right? They don't necessarily, still an act of violence, right? So I'm not going to say that there's no reason for any act of violence to ever have happened before 10,000 years ago. I'm saying at 10,000 years ago, we see this rise of violence, and it's a very sharp and dramatic rise of violence. What's going on at 10,000 years ago? 10,000 years ago, we're changing how we live. We're going from living in a very egalitarian, very I can prove to you, and when we talk about Homo erectus, I talk about this. We've been scientific for 2 million years. Homo erectus has science. I can show you where we have had medicine, full foot amputation 31,000 years ago in Borneo, which is a perfect foot amputation. And I was a radiographer before I was an anthropologist, and I have sat in many amputations. And it's such a perfect foot amputation that it's unlike, you don't see its like today. And that's with a lived time after the amputation of a minimum 9 years, right? So we've had medicine forever, right? We have risen in the environment like every other species, speciated in the environment and speciated in space to be perfect to the space that we are speciating in, to be perfect to the space that we are living in, so that we can tend the environment, so that we can use this beautiful, creative, malleable mind that we have to tend and care for the environment. We will talk about how we are biologically nurturing and communal. These are things that we were given to tend the environment. This is known as animism. This is where your spirituality, your sense of community, your sense of citizenship, everything about you is really tied into being a part of the biome, fitting in your niche, fulfilling the need of the biome. Every single plant and every single animal that you know of, every species that you see that was not influenced by us or created by us, was created to fulfill a niche in the biome. I just explained how I'm dating violence at 10,000 years ago, though. If you were not listening, sorry, it looked like it was the same one as earlier. So I was like, wait a minute. By articles that are actually up right now on YouTube, where they show that before 10,000 years ago, there is roughly 2% of things that could possibly be attributed to violence in the archaeological record. But at 10,000 years ago, it goes from that possible things that could be possibly attributed to violence to 18 to 20% things that are an absolute sign of violence. Possibly be attributed means if I can't see, I can't tell if the hole in the back of your skull was a rock that was held by a human or a rock that fell out of a cave wall, right? I can't tell that. But at 10,000 years ago, a woman bound with her hands underneath her belly while she is pregnant and killed from behind is an absolute measure of violence, right? So thousands of years ago is KY is thousands of years ago. Around this time, as we're moving into cities, is what we're doing. We're moving into our agriculture-based cities. Now, we see that at 18,000 years ago, the rise of monocrop agriculture starts along the Nile. And the Nile is perfectly suited for monocrop agriculture. It floods every year, and that flooding fertilizes the ground every year. It replenishes the nutrients in the ground every year. And it also makes it to where most crops don't actually stay right there, right? So having fresh space to give that ability along the Nile for you to plant crops. Actually, they thrive. We see that barley starts there, right? And starts getting husbanded there. We see that start of husbandry, I'm just going to do it because I will turn these back on, but let's go ahead and actually do it a little bit differently. Just because, oh, it might not do it. Aha, that might be why. Okay. We're going to just turn these off for now. I'll turn these back on in a little bit so you can answer questions or ask questions, but otherwise it's going to end up with me too distracted to get through an entire subject. Again, over on YouTube, which is up there, you can comment. If you have questions, please go over there and comment there if you need to ask them before I turn the comments back on. It just gives an extra step with trolls. It also keeps me from getting too distracted because I don't see that one as directly as I see this one. For some reason, my own issues mean that I have to stare at my face when I'm talking to you because I have to see somebody. If I don't see somebody, it's not working for me, right? Thank you. Thank you. And I do see the comments sometimes, but sometimes if I have my pages switched over, I don't on YouTube. So when we're seeing, I've got hair, speaking of cat hair, there's still cat hair of my last baby left. Caught the night before last. And then my son's cat is here. So there's still cat hair everywhere. As we see this switch in the archaeological record, we're seeing this switch from living in concert with the environment, which is, again, an animistic sense. Animistic is a belief. Let me see if I can give you the exact definition of animistic because I want to make sure that my definitions are right. So one of them, and please understand, sometimes there's going to be 5 or 6 different definitions, and you kind of have to take and twist them all together to make one. Relating to or based on animism, the belief of natural objects, natural phenomena, and the universe itself having souls. It's believing the biome itself having, and everything within the biome itself having as much right to the biome as you, being co-creator of the good green world, being a part of instead of being a step above, right? And your spirituality is tied to this. Your sense of community is tied to this. Your sense of belonging and understanding is tied to this. This is an animistic sense. And it's really just understanding that we're just another fucking animal in the biome. We're not some great thing set above, and this is not a gift that we were given to destroy, right? And it's really just an understanding that the planet is not ours to destroy, right? So with that, we see that there is this shift of understanding. We see that this shift of understanding is coming along with this shift in the way that we are managing our food and our resources. And again, we see that monocrop agriculture starting along the Nile in its yearly flood, washing things away, wanting to ensure that you have nutrients there. Barley grows along the Nile naturally, so replanting it, but replanting it as monocrops and learning to husband it and learning to tend and guide, which is indigenous animistic agriculture. If this live goes down, we'll be right back. It is not the live itself going down. It is something to do with the internet. I don't even know. So if I pause, we'll be right back, just so you know, because it started to lag a bit. So when we start to see this move from the Nile into what we know of today as the Fertile Crescent, Iraq, this is Mesopotamia and right? What is today Iraq? When we start to see this moving into the Fertile Crescent, we see that they're taking this idea that, again, you see that the flooding is taking away vegetation in that space. And so replacing it with vegetation that's already there, but replacing it every year in that soil, that it's natural to, in a space that the soil is replenishing, that any other crops that are hardy enough to live through the flood are still there. So there's nutrients there, right? Placing it there actually is beneficial for it. It gets all its needs. They're taking this and they're taking it into regions where it is already growing, but they're moving it. And in their moving of it, you see the start of small communities that are agricultural based communities. There's a recent article that came out that I don't think I actually have put up yet. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick because it's in my saves. That came out that was talking about how the first agricultural communities actually have much more land than people. Like the land is greater than the people. There's more land than we would think of what's necessary for the people on the land. Smaller villages than the land would necessarily say to us today. And with this, this is telling us that these communities are rather small. And I'm trying to see if I can find this article because it was within the last couple of weeks. I haven't actually put it up on the page. Give me about 2 seconds here. There's so much that's coming out. There we go. One of the world's earliest farming villages housed surprisingly few people. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to put it up on the YouTube so you can see it. I won't have it on the website right away, but because that would just distract too much right now, but we will make sure it gets on the website as well. So this is through Science News, right? It's assumed that its buildings were simultaneously constructed and occupied. So excavations of dense clusters of buildings at Chattelholik, such as the one shown here, have resulted in inflated population estimates for one of the world's earliest known farming villages. So this one, this is in Turkey. Discovery in 1960s, population estimates for the ancient settlement have ranged from 2,800 to 10,000. In this massive southern Turkey site called Chattelholik, and I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong. I apologize. My pronunciations are frequently off. If accurate, these numbers support a decades-old idea that after around 1,000 years, early Neolithic villages experienced rapid growth and revolutionary social changes thanks to plant and animal domestication. But an average of only 600 to 800 people lived at this farming and herding village during its heyday around 8,600 years ago. So this is talking about actually having smaller people in farming and herding villages. When we're looking at the earlier villages, we're seeing actually that they date back to about 14,000 years ago. This may be one of our earliest, but I know of early villages in the Arabian Peninsula that date back to 14,000 years ago. That's our first evidence of monocrop agriculture within that space. And this is going to be done by small communities, not by singular people, right? So our first evidence of this is dating back to about 14,000 years ago as it's translated from running along the Nile to running along the Mesopotamian basin in the Fertile Crescent. This is 8,600 years ago, so this is a little bit closer than that, right? But we're seeing that we're looking at only 600 to 800 people in these communities. Now, by this time, animistic groups are going to have larger communities, especially in areas that have seen population for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? And the longest population that we have really in this area. Like we've been living in this area for 150,000 years. As Homo sapiens, Homo Neanderthal lived in this area with us. This is an area that has been occupied for an extensive period of time. The only other extendedly long period of time that I know of is the Nile. The Nile has actually housed every human species that has come along. Along the Nile has been every human species. 1 second, okay. I'm going to try something. Somebody told me yesterday that they were going to give me a hand with some of this. So let me go ahead and see if I can get this to them and let them know what's going on. I thought the VPN would change it, but well, it seems to actually be reaching higher. Sorry, I'm trying to type. I just want to make sure I've got some help in trying to figure out why it keeps freezing on me and dropping me down. I really hope the VPN would fix it. I've tried everything else, and I really hoped. So I'm going to turn back on comments for a while, just so that we can make sure I've got people coming in who are able to speak. Okay, we can deal with that. So, hi, Legal. It's good to see you. Just trying to see why it just keeps freezing on me. Yes, we can ask questions now. I apologize for having the comments off. It was getting a little bit brutal in the comments, and that's why I turned them off. And I also easily squirrel, and so I try and make sure that I'm not actually squirreling too much. So I don't know all the knowledge just because I don't try to know all the knowledge. And I try to find new knowledge all the time. Do not know that site. I haven't actually looked at that one. I don't really study a lot of Turtle Island and Abiyalian and sites. Archaeology in Turtle Island and Abiyala is still extremely disrespectful to those of us who do not want our ancestors disturbed, right? And so I won't practice archaeology in the United States unless it's an archaeology that is extremely in concert with the nations and their sovereignty. And so I don't really focus on archaeology. I'm sorry, this was coming up. Is this one that's in Nebraska or is it one that's in? Okay. Okay, I see why. Okay, so no, I haven't actually looked at this one. Sorry, I was thinking that it said Nebraska. It didn't say Nebraska when I was looking at it on the map. And then I'm looking at it as it's pulling up and it's actually in Ukraine. This is 4000 BC. So I haven't actually looked at this one. Mainly because I tend to look earlier, right? Like my focus is way earlier because this is 4,000 years ago, which is also kind of what I was going to say with the Turtle Island stuff is it doesn't predate a lot of stuff. This is the time period, and it isn't typically the time period that I look in, and so I haven't really looked at this. What about it? Some sites are dated back to 6,000. Let me look it up as a full and see if they've got let me see who's doing the work on it. Let me see. I'm trying to see what you're looking for in the difference or what it is guess what you're asking. Let me see. Okay. So I'm not sure where it would fit in with this. The reason that I'm not sure where it's going to fit in, the article that we were just talking about, Catholic is brand new. It's like a new information that they're looking at. This article and the two that I'm seeing that I've found are from 2014, so they're not more of a newer information. Also, the article with the Catalhoic is looking at 8,600 years ago, which is about 4,000 years before I'm seeing dates on this one, because the earliest date that I'm seeing on, and I'm not going to try and butcher the name, is 4,500 or 4,800 years ago, right? So 6,000 years ago. So it's about actually not 4,000. Well, let me look at that article and make sure that we're looking at KYA and not, okay, so years ago. So it's about 2,000 years after the Catalhoic site. So I'm not exactly sure how the Catalhoic site is fitting in with that one. The Catalhoic site in their new interpretation may actually change the interpretation from 2000. Like they're looking at 2004, 2012, 84 are the dates of the articles that are being referenced in this article and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that the old information is incorrect. What I'm saying is that this information that I'm getting is old information. This new information, I'm not sure, since it's not my studies. Like it's not something, this is an article that just came across. I'm not sure how this changes this. This is somebody's article that they just presented and just did a bunch of study on and just put it up. And it's the new information, and it may fully change this other site, or it may change it not at all, because there's 2,000 years of difference in them, right? So I'm not sure yet what it says about this older article. All I know is that Catalhoic was thought of to be a site that was extremely populated, but is not a site that has the thousands of people that it was assumed to have. In fact, it has roughly 600 to 800 people. Now, what the point of with that was, when we're looking at these early archaeological or early agricultural communities that are based on monocrop agriculture and early animal husbandry, we're not looking at communities that are generally as large as we think they are, which does kind of say, I'm not sure what this old article is going to change into with the information this new article states, right? So, it may be that I think they're saying like 11,000 people in this other one, the planning one. Let me look and see if I can see the number of people. I saw something, but I knew it was like in the tens of thousands. I just don't remember what the actual number was. Well, let me see. And these might be, they might be marking them differently, right? They might be looking at different things in the archaeological record to they might be different things that they're looking at in the archaeological record that give them the different numbers. 2,000 years after, there might be more people in that area because they've learned how to make it support more people. There's a lot of different factors. The 8,600 years ago is actually a couple thousand years after what I was when I'm talking about the early farming communities, when I'm thinking, because I'm thinking between 14,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago as we're looking at this shift, right? But Catalhoic might tell us what those earlier communities are looking at because it's one of the earlier communities that we have, right? This is a little bit later than even Catalhoic. So I really don't, I don't know how it's going to change it. If it's something that's interesting to you, though, I would absolutely keep an eye on it. And that article will be on my widdaord.com site under the rise of violence or underneath the bibliographies. I'll put it in underneath something. If it's not underneath the rise of violence, I'll put it underneath a new tab so it'll be understandable. So if you want to go and find this article later, and if you want to go over to YouTube right now, it's on Science News, Independent Journalism since 1921. It's under Archaeological News, and it is one of the world's earliest farming villages housed surprisingly few people, is the article. If you want to see how that might actually interplay between the two, that'd be awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead. Some locations, some sites on this site, or are you talking other sites specifically? Some of the Nebel-Ivica sites are dated prior to 6,000 years ago. That would make sense. And no, please don't be sorry. There's no sorry. You were completely kind and I'm completely interested. I wasn't trying to discredit you or invalidate your question at all. And if it came across like that, I apologize. That was not my intent. I hate our auto response for my auto response for but. I'm not sure yet how it changes. It's a very cool site. And especially if we're looking at something, and that information actually is really cool. Thank you. I like looking at some of the earlier dynamics that we see, just because when we're looking at some of the earlier dynamics, we absolutely see that many early, even Western-based monocrop agriculture communities were egalitarian. The rise in the city structure is really where we get the rise of that hierarchical thought process that gives us a pinnacle, a king level, and it's really not till then that we get those. It's really not until we're getting to actual major cities, right, that I've seen any of that. So I think in the earlier towns and the earlier villages, I think that that's one of the things that I really do like to have understood and point out, is that as we're moving from being in egalitarian communities already into, from egalitarian gathering communities, right? I am studying the science of creation. That's what I'm teaching, is the science of how you were created by the biome. If you choose to call the biome GOD, then you can call the biome GOD all you want. That's okay for you. It's okay for anybody. I mean, I prefer you wouldn't base it on somebody who thinks that bloodshed is proper. Manifest destiny and, all that horror. If you wish to base your life on that, that's fine. It's a sadness for you that I feel, because of the fact that you're always going to base your worth on ephemeral things that don't matter. You haven't learned yet that your worth is just breathing. You don't have to be exploited by your faith or your government, right? You're worthy just by breathing. But if you want to equate the biome that created us to a GOD, you can go right the heck ahead. I would only ask that you Do not see that GOD's actions as narcissistic actions of violence, and instead have your God be a loving, beautiful being that encourages lovingness between, right, instead of division. That's all it asks. Yeah, well, okay, so if they're by 4,500 years ago, then they're probably egalitarian where other places are. The earlier ones, yes, I'm going to state that as we're moving from animism into early farming communities, or gathering into early farming-based communities, that we're going to carry over that egalitarianness in our community, right? And it's not until we get to that cities that we're going to get that. So if we're getting into cities, because our first one is Engazal at 9,000 years ago, right? If we're getting into cities at this time frame, and we're getting into hierarchy, even kind of before Catahoic, then by the time 9,000 years ago to, wait a minute, I want to make sure that we're looking at, I think it's 6,000 years ago because it is BCE. You are right. It's 6,000 years ago because it's BCE. It's not KYA, right? Archaeology and anthropology likes to put two different ways of dating in all of their papers. They are either giving you the date BCE AD style, or they are giving you the date before present, right? Or KYA. So it's actually three different ways, right? And one of them you have to recalculate. The other two you don't, but one of them you kind of have to recalculate. So the BCE you have to recalculate and add 2,000 years to it, right? Before present means before 1950, and KYA means thousands of years ago. So if you add 2,000 years, or you just KYA or BP it, then you're off by 50 years, kind of, but 50 years, that's like, maybe 2 generations, who cares, right? So when we're doing that, it's, have a great one. Thank you, Teaser. Yeah, absolutely. So by this time, you're going to see that most of the communities will probably have, if 9,000 years ago is our start of these hierarchical cities, as they're moving out by about 6,000 years ago, we're absolutely seeing that you're seeing city states, right? Starting to form, right? 6,000 years ago, we're seeing city states forming along the Nile, right? Because Kemet starts roughly 6,000 years ago along the Nile. So you're seeing city states have actually started to form, where you're seeing many different communities, or many different communities becoming cities becoming a nationality. So you might have a central city who has spread. I'll be back. Apologies. So you're seeing city-states that have taken their city into the land around them and become a city-state. Okay? I'm going to put the article, I'm looking at a couple of different articles. I'm going to put one of the articles I'm looking at over on YouTube, so you'll see it. Again, this article is not on my website. I'll go ahead and try and put it on my website when I put the other one on my website, having to do with Catahoic. This article is about, the one that I'm reading is through Antiquity, and it is about, and I'm going to butcher this, I apologize before I do so, Nebel Ivica, and I'd butcher that too, but in the Ukraine. In Ukraine, my apologies, in Ukraine. So when we're seeing these earlier farming communities that are maintaining themselves, or not actually becoming a member of a city-state down the road, right? It probably is an extremely rare instance of a farming community that is really egalitarian by this time, right? I would think that the early ones are absolutely going to be egalitarian as they're moving from gathering into monocrop agriculture communities. You're going to see that many of these communities, the way that they're already gathering is what we call collecting. And that is we have two different types of gathering. We have hunter-gatherers, and then we have collectors. Hunter-gatherers move on a yearly migratory pattern and usually return to the same place every year. They might even have houses in the same place every year. Spring house, summer house, kind of nice way to live. And collectors will have a space that they stay in already, and then they leave that space and bring things back to that space, right? They leave to go hunting and come back. They leave to go get the salmon and come back. They leave to go berry picking and come back. They leave to go get the bass in the sea and come back, right? They go to the shore and come back, right? So some of those gathering communities already being collectors are really already in a space anyways. And so them starting monocrop agriculture in that space, they're already there. They're already stable. So they're not going to change so much of their way of life, their way of interacting with each other, as they're changing the way that they're grabbing food, right? They've already got one change going on, right? Now, after, a few thousand years, it's probably adjusting, right? It's probably copying larger spaces that are able to maintain for longer periods of time, things like that, just because adaptation. That's one of the things that we're really good about, is adapting, right? So by this time, it is probably very rare. It's a beautiful thought process to still have, though, and people still trying to get that thought process and understanding up. It's a beautiful article to have. Thank you very much. When we are looking at the rise of violence rising alongside the rise of monocrop agricultural cities, what we're seeing is in these early monocrop agriculture cities, you're seeing that there are communities like this where you have egalitarian communities, probably 600 to 800 people, if not less, in your egalitarian community, that have been kind of trying farming for a while, right? They've moved this from the Nile, where it kind of really works well, to the Fertile Crescent, where it doesn't work as well. And so it's kind of becoming a hard scrabble existence. As this hard scrabble existence is continuing, this shift from working with nature to kind of trying to control nature, you see a shift concept coming into. You see the shift of being a part of, the shift from being a part of the community, a part of the biome, into a shift of being able to possess things within the biome, right? So now I can possess land. And once I can possess land, dehumanize the biome itself, right? Take away the soul, or my belief in the soul of the biome, because I have to do that if I'm going to be causing destruction to the biome. And if I have decided that this spot right here is mine, nobody else can have it, right? As I am moving away from living in concert to the biome to owning the biome, you see a shift in ownership to owning animals as well. This, of course, leads down to the ownership of humans, right? And this is just another level of dehumanization. First, we dehumanize the land, then we dehumanize the plants, then we dehumanize the animals, then we dehumanize other people. It's around this time, at 10,000 years ago, I'm going to go ahead and shift our website back to the Widda Ord website, so that we're talking again about the rise of violence. So that's fixing the website. That's not what we wanted. I'm going to shift this back into our rise of violence. As we're seeing these shifts between having these early farming communities into having these cities, what we're seeing is that the first cities really caused climate destruction. Angazal was great for 300 years. Angazal is along a river in Jordan, and Angazal takes monocrop agriculture into a fertile river valley. It rips everything out of that valley, plants all of its monocrop, and husbands its animals in the hills. My remembrance of it is that there was roughly like between 5 and 10,000 people within Angazal. Again, the books are not right in front of me right now, and so it's a little hard to remember. And Angazal has since re-risen several times. Angazal is there today, not the original. There is archaeological record of the living, and then the absence, and then the living, and then the absence. That's awesome. Well, and it was actually this conversation of this when I did archaeology of the Near East, where I went. I'd always known that we weren't like climate change is typical, like the globe shifts and changes, right? Climate change is typical, and went, ha 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 ha, destruction, destruction, because that's what it is. It's destroying the environment. It takes a biome and it rips half of it out, right? When you rip out all the nutrients in the soil and then put something else in there to leach what remains the nutrients from the soil, it's impossible for that soil to work for an extended period of time. Like it dies after a while because all of the things that nutriate the soil, replenish the soil, give back to the soil, grow the soil are taken. I'm not in conspiracy holes. We're not in conspiracy holes in chat, are we? Oh, I see what you're saying. Never mind. Never mind. I haven't gone there yet. We've used a VPN now. We're trying. So when we are looking at this early shift, we see that this early shift into climate destruction, we can see that monocrop agriculture does that today. If you research any form of monocrop agriculture, you will find that what monocrop agriculture does is rip out the entire environment that it wants to put itself in. And think about it. I have to remove all the trees. I have to remove all the other plants. I have to till up the soil, get rid of all the rocks and the bugs and the different things in the soil. And rocks help plants, right? This is part of the biome. It helps, right? It gives aeration to the soil. It gives space, right, for bugs to hide. Bugs themselves nutriate the soil. The roots from other plants will send off chemicals into the soil that nutriate the soil, right? So when you rip all of that out and you put one singular crop in there, that singular crop is only taking from the environment. It has got nothing to give to, and it has nothing to get from. And then all of it's taking from, eventually it robs it of everything, and you're done. You're dead. You have nothing that can grow because the soil has become sterile. We see that it takes 300 years in Angazol, and then Angazol is gone. Angazol, of course, rises again, and we see other cities rising up again. And as we're starting to see these other cities rise again, we also start to see what we call the start of writing. Though it is not, in fact, the start of writing. The start of writing is actually hieroglyphs and Kemet. And that is, if you don't know of the recent discoveries within the last year or so that talk about writing on cave walls 21,000 years ago. Maybe it's 27,000 years ago, and 21 is the necklace. But we see in the 20,000 years ago's range that there is a couple evidences of writing within both jewelry that we found and within cave walls that we found. But many people will consider the start of writing to be cuneiform, right? It is not. Again, even if we are not looking at the ancient stuff, Kemet is still the start of writing. Hieroglyphs are still the start of writing. Cuneiform is, by definition, the first alphabet. An alphabet is something where the symbol only means a syllable, a sound, right? Hieroglyphs, the symbol can mean a sound or it can mean a whole word depending on different inflections of symbols around it. Like a cartouche changes something from 3 different words, hawk, boat, staff, to a pharaoh's name. And I cannot translate off the top of my head, right? But right, to a name using ha-bo-sta, right? Habosta is our pharaoh because we've used these 3 sounds, right? And the cartouche changes that. This is why hieroglyphs are different from cuneiform. They are still very valid. They are the earliest that we have extensive documentation for that we can translate and read writing. And they are a beautiful form of writing, right? When we're looking at Cuneiform. Cuneiform is documenting things that happened thousands of years ago. I'm not exactly sure. I did see recently, so I don't think too much. Maybe we did go through, we might have gone through a couple things. We've moved on from the nebulous Vicky back into where we're seeing that rise of violence. And we did talk about the fact that monocrop agriculture really causes climate destruction. It takes and it rips everything out of the environment and it replaces it with a single crop. And that single crop doesn't have things to nutrient it in the environment. And so it ends up turning the soil sterile within a few hundred years. And Angazal is a representation of that, where we see this early city turning a fertile valley into a sterile wasteland in 300 years. So when we seen a few different, I haven't seen that one, but I've seen a few different. I mean, corn itself is a fascinating thing, especially when you compare corn to barley and wheat, and you compare corn and barley and wheat and the methods of husbandry that have gotten them to the place that they're at, since we're talking about monocrop agriculture. Part of our understanding of that fertility in the soil actually is really huge in this concept. When you look at corn and barley and wheat, all three started as plants that are the same size. On one side of the globe, the guiders of corn took corn from this small grain and loved it. They gave it all it needed. They gave it siblings, right? They gave it a warm space to grow in. They didn't remove it. They didn't force it. They didn't control it. They tended it and they guided it. On the other side of the globe, the same size of a plant was ripped from its home, even when its home was 5 miles away, right? All of its siblings were ripped out of the environment around it, and it was put into soil that had no nutrient and had no love. And people worked harder to make it grow, caused more physical trauma to their own bodies, took themselves from working 16 hours a week at their hype, which is what hunter-gatherers for the workaholics work, 8 hours a week at their typical or average, which is hunter-gatherers' average need of work to contribute to an entire community, to make that community grow, right? Took that away from themselves. Well, they toiled from sun up before sun up to after sundown and starved half the year in pain and in agony. And what they got from it was a couple centimeters of growth. Whereas corn's tending and the way that corn was loved and the way that corn was interacted with and corn given siblings and corn not being controlled and corn not being violated by being ripped around and tossed around was able to grow inches, miles, right? When we look at the translation from the same size grain from corn and wheat and barley and the way they were husbanded and tended and worked through and controlled or harmed, right? The differences we can see where this is fertile, giving, loving, and creates abundance, where this is violent, harmful to every person involved, including the biome, which is a person too, and shrinks and withers away, right? Absolutely. Turtle Island and Abiyala were tended gardens north to south, east to west. It's documented by all early European invaders, and they have recently proven that the rainforests are planted. That somebody created the rainforests. So, good morning, Decray. When we are looking at the way that violence rises, I like to talk about how we bring othering into this situation, because to me, this is the most important part, right? Well, maybe in concert. It's very important to me that you realize that we are not innately evil. We're not innately violent. Many of us believe that we're innately violent, that there is innate evil within humanity. That's why we must be baptized. That's why we must be forgiven of original sin, right? There is this thought and concept that innately we're bad, right? If you are innately something, you can't change it. If I'm innately something, I can't fix it. And you are not innately bad. Innately, you are nurturing, you are communal, and you are creative. You like to know things. Those are the things that are innate about you. Absolutely. Those are the things that are innate about you as a species. Those are biological necessities within your species. Be right back. So I'm here, but I am going to pause it myself really quick. I need to message somebody and see if maybe I can get some help. Oh no, I lost my charger. There it is. Oh, whoa. I might be able to log on to Discord on my computer. Hold on a second. I forget. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. Western agriculture causes climate destruction. Sorry, let me move my big old face out of the middle of that. I'm trying to see if I can see if I can get some help on why we can't. I would state that hunter-gathering and collecting lifestyles first. Gatherer lives fall into two categories: hunter-gatherers and collectors. Hunter-gatherers move with the seasons. They might move to the same house, have your winter home and your summer home. Some hunter-gatherer groups did that. Some migrational groups did that. There's hunter-gatherers and collectors are the other part of gatherers. And those are people who actually stay in one space, right? And the people staying in one space called collectors, they have their city or their village, and then they go out and they bring in. Hunting, gathering lifestyles, collecting lifestyles actually provide more abundance than monocrop agriculture provides. Because as we were just talking, you can see from husbanding corn and husbanding wheat, that corn was husbanded from something the same size as the original wheat plant or barley plant was. And where wheat and barley was controlled and ripped apart and forced to, live without other siblings in its environment to provide nutrients, other plants, other beings around it to provide nutrients. It was only able to grow centimeters, whereas corn was given siblings. It was given a positive environment, had all of the different things within it to provide nutrients for it, and it grew centimeters and inches, and it became this huge, huge thing today. And this is a difference in tending and guiding and loving and being co-creators and caring for, versus control and violence and forced labor for yourself and the plant itself, and all of those different things that are, all of those things in together really show a huge difference in what we get in the end, right? And so, that's a part of today's conversation. I'm trying to figure out why, and I can't get into Discord on here. So this is going to actually pause me for 2 seconds. I will be back on this pause because it's me doing it deliberately. So give me a second. I'm going to try and message somebody and see if I can get this to actually, I can do it from here. Ha! Brown, do you need to go out again? Dang it. Oh. No, it didn't work like that. 1 second. I'm sorry. Hush, honey. I am here. I apologize. I'm trying to figure out why I'm having issues where my live keeps dropping. So you will actually see me pausing because my live keeps dropping. But I was trying to pause to message somebody to see if they might have. Claudia, I'm just sitting out here because I'm not doing that either. Come on. I think he's starting to get dementia. I apologize, YouTube, for stepping away. If I can convince you that it's worth to give me everything you make, that you should wake up every morning and work this life that you already know is a much harder life, right? That is already much harder than the hunting and gathering life that we had before, right? And the collecting life that we had before. If I can convince you to not only live this life for me, but also give me all of your money, then I can convince you to just give me everything, right? So how do I do that? Right? Well, I got to give you something to fear. I got to give you something besides me. I have to have a sleight of hand in this, right? And so we see that othering starts at this time. And othering is this method of convincing you that I who am trying to rule you and take all your stuff, right? I am, actually, let me do it with that. What conditions create this need? So there are several thought processes on why we switched to monocrop-based agriculture. Nobody has come up with a definitive result. Monocrop agriculture in cities starting at 9,000 years ago. We have stories much later in cuneiform, right? of who these first kings are and who these early kings are. In every instance with these early kings, what we see is a childhood that would develop mutation. So we know now epigenetics will create mutation in the genes, right, in a result for trauma. So when you have a childhood that could create narcissistic personality disorder, the epigenetic within that can trigger the creation of genes, right? Can trigger that epigenetic response in your genes, which is where we would get an aggressor gene from, which is considered to be the gene that predicts the dark triad traits. Now, to have a dark triad diagnosis, or to be somebody who has the dark triad problems, right? You don't just have the gene, you also have to have something to trigger the gene. The gene in and of itself doesn't do jack shit. You have to trigger the gene. And in the triggering of the gene, what you get is specific behavior, or not specific circumstances. 1 second. I am not feeding you. You're not going outside. You're coming over here and you're sitting down. No, we're done with this. You're whiny and rude. You don't need to go potty. You've already eaten. It's not lunchtime. You're just fine. So when we see the earliest documentation of who these first kings were, what we see is childhoods that would create MPD today. Sargon is considered our first documentation of a king, and he is written about after he was, right? He's the first one that we know of in record. And what we see is somebody who was abandoned as a child and put in a basket and floated down a river. And when he was abandoned in the basket and abandoned as a child and put in the basket and floated down the river, he landed with this man who was coming in different translations. He's either a gardener of a king or he's a subsistent farmer, a monocrop agricultural farmer in a small community. When they pull him out of that basket and he's adopted by this man, he becomes a child of somebody who doesn't have a lot, who is struggling with monocrop agriculture farming, and he grows up in this space as an abandoned child. And even if this man is giving him all the love in the world, it is still a hard existence that has a lack of food and has a lack of not luxury, but safety, right? A lack of security, right? Whether or not you're getting love from the person that's raising you, you're getting a lack of security, and why did my parent abandon me, right? Sargon grew up to believe, depending on the translation, that he was either the child of a god of the river or that he was the child of a king. And in his belief that he was either the child of a god of the river or the god of a king, he decided that he deserved to rule. So Sargon gathers together his friends and decides that he's going to rule this city and convinces everybody to follow him and create this city, right? He's going to rule the communities around him and create this city. And so in doing this, we see a childhood of lack, a childhood of trauma that is known to create NPD or megalomania or the three in the dark triad. Megalomania is not in it. It's NPD and psychopathy and Machiavellianism. It's known to create these issues, right? And then we see actions that would follow along what people who have this mental health issue actually act like, the disorder actually act like, right? This belief that they are the child of a god, the belief that they are somehow special, gathering people together with this charismatic behavior and getting people to do things for them and taking from them so that they can get their just rewards and their just due. For me, this is the start of narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And for me, in what I've done and researched, to me, this is why we have it at 15 to 20%, I think, is the current rate within our society today. Yeah. This is because which term, right? That would be the first question I'm asking. And I see the respect in it. And I ask that because, oh, no. Actually, most people don't know that that's what the term is. I do explain it in the beginning, right? And what I explain is that Wid is the second half of Druid, right? Means knowledge, being the feminine enemy and ending. It's to my knowledge the oldest etymology of the word witch, right? And what it means is science of the feminine, knowledge of the feminine, right? And I am utilizing that as somebody who is studying the science of creation to explain what I am doing. It is also something I've been using for 20 years to describe my faith. I've never seen that word anywhere else, right? Like, and I've had people say that, like, trying to argue with me what the word means, go and Google it and say that they can't find it underneath that anywhere. I've never heard of that word used for that. And you're fine. You're showing, I mean, I can tell. I mean, we're good. I've never seen it used for that. And I'm assuming by multilingual, you mean somebody who is raised multilingual, not somebody who's a polyglot, right? Because a polyglot is somebody who speaks multiple languages, right? But Métis for me, I would not call myself Métis. I'm not Métis. Métis is a specific people. Métis is a specific group of people that I do not have connection to. I mean, beautiful, wonderful, amazing indigenous people who I would not claim connection to, because that would be, without having that connection, would be extremely rude. So Métis, at least in the United States and Canada, Métis is a nation, right? So I wouldn't use that. Yeah, so I would not say I'm Métis on any level. I use the term Widda specific, and like I said, there's anthropological and archaeological and linguistic reasons why I use the word Widda. If that word is used by other people for another thing that I've never seen before, I'm not sure. I am multilingual. I speak a couple of languages. I mean, I'm not using it for that, but I do speak a couple languages. I would consider myself more of a polyglot, right? Because that's usually what's being used for speaking a couple of languages. I've definitely not used Métis. I use Widda because, again, Wid is the root word for knowledge, right? It's the root of Druid, Druid being oak, knowledge. And as far as I can find within Proto-Indo-European, it's the oldest etymology, and it has to do with science of the feminine, as far as I've been able. And that's like 20 something years of study on it. And it is also what I used starting. God, it has to be older than that, because my daughter is 26 this year. So 26 years ago, I started using it as my faith, as the term for my faith. I don't like the term Wicca, because Wicca is a modern thought process. It's not an indigenous thought process, whereas Widda is knowledge, as knowledge of the feminine is an indigenous concept, right? And I don't follow along. I think I have read that book, actually. So that's why, well, not closer. I wouldn't even say Arsatru, because Arsatru is totally different too. It is animistic, right? It's an animistic concept. Celtic indigenous concepts are animistic concepts, right? And Druidic concept is an animistic concept, right? Arsatru is not necessarily indigenous. It would be considered to be native, not indigenous. If Arsatru is so many, it's a it's a Scandinavian word. There are different Scandinavian areas, and some are technically considered Scandinavian. It is taking the religion that we last saw among people that we title the Vikings, though that is not their name, that is their occupation, right? Is taking a name that we last saw or a faith that we last saw among them that is not technically an animistic faith. And the people who the Vikings end up becoming are not the indigenous people of those areas. Usually, depending on the area, again, right? They're actually by UN terminology, because indigenous and native only mean the same thing in the United States. They're actually native to that area, and indigenous people are different. There, I froze again. Coming back, coming back. I just don't get it. Sorry, it does this. It's been doing this for the last 2 weeks. I've tried everything. I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I really just don't even know what to do anymore. I've done legitimately everything that I can. Unfortunately, I apologize. It's just as annoying for me as it is for you. I apologize. So, and Celtic indigenous concept. So the pre-concept is really, thank you. So it's only within the U.S. that indigenous and native are the same thing. Anywhere else is. I didn't say it meant mixed race. I said it meant knowledge of the feminine. Is your friend a linguistic, like somebody who studies linguistics? Actually, if your friend would like to come in and discuss the etymology of my name, then your friend can come in and discuss the etymology of my name, but I'm not going to play telephone through three different people, because now we're on something completely different that was never stated on any point. And I stated, and I absolutely stated that Métis is a specific nation. And I don't know what it means in academia medicine as mixed. I've never seen Métis used as mixed really in that. And as an academia who's been in medicine, it's okay. That's, if he would like to discuss with me why I utilize the name that I've used for 26 years as a faith-based name and as a description of my occupation, then he's welcome to, but it needs to be a one-on-one so that I can actually understand what I'm talking about, and they can understand what I'm talking about, and they can get their point across, and I can hear what they're saying, because telephone ain't going to work for me. I use it, or I hear it like I hear Druid, because that's where I get it from. Wid in the second half of Druid. I get this from the Proto-Indo-European discussion based by Bernard. I've got the book on my website. It's there, the book, The Druids, and I based it based on that. And as far as I can tell, it is Widda. Wid being knowledge, being this feminine ending, the feminine sound, or the denotion of feminine. And that's what I use it for. Back to the conversation about where we get this rise of othering within societies. When we see that our first kings, our first god kings, have this thought process based on, I need to perform control over you. And when we can see that many of them are, they have to have some level of the dark triad infliction, because they have some level of dark triad traits, and they all seem to have childhoods that follow along with childhoods that create dark triad traits. We can see this as an epigenetic mutation that causes a gene to rise. Now, if I am trying to make sure my children survive, and I am living in the dirt and I am scrabbling for food, I'm going to marry up I'm going to try and marry somebody who has enough money, enough food, everything else, so that I can actually eat and so that my children can eat. That's how we get genes to survive. So if everybody is trying to marry into the royal family, the top of the hierarchy, but the royal family is carrying these traits and this destruction, we're seeing that that gene gets passed down to everybody. Literally today, they say that pretty much everybody on the planet can be connected to a king or a queen somewhere. If you have any form of DNA outside of Turtle Island and Abya, you can be connected to a king or a queen in the area that your DNA is coming from, if not in a broader scale. Like anybody in Europe can be connected back to Charlemagne. The vast majority of Asia can be connected back to Genghis Khan. Many in Africa, in the northern portions, can be connected back to kings there. Same thing in the southern portions, right? So you're seeing in Australia, you can connect it all back to one family. You can see where people all get connected back in these places where we're seeing hierarchical thought processes taking charge and kind of covering the globe, that the genes for the person in charge are the genes that end up getting passed down because they're the surviving genes. They have a higher rate of survivability, which is very logical when you think they eat. They're not, if I'm living a soft, luxurious life where I'm getting fed 3 meals a day and people are taking care of me, I'm going to live longer and produce more children than somebody who is up before the crack of dawn, working hard till the point that their bones are breaking and they're overheated and underfed and all of that sort of stuff, right? So when we're looking at that, we can logically see why you're going to marry up, and why those whose genes last are those who have more survivability, are those who are on top, right? So how do I maintain control over you? First, I tell you, you got to come and get protected by my soldiers, because the barbarians in the hills are going to steal your food. When that no longer works, because pretty much everybody is living in different cities, in different city states, now I tell you that that city state is more barbaric than you, and they don't have the knowledge that you do, and they're going to come and they're going to steal your knowledge. Now I've made you afraid. You're okay, baby. I made you afraid of different things already. I've made you afraid of the barbarians in the hills. You're still afraid of the barbarians in the hills, but now you're also afraid of that nation state. So now you have to stay here and give me all your food so that I can pay my army so that you can be safe while I live in luxury and you're not eating. Early cities are also rife with disease, rife with destruction of health, because what you're looking at is, even today, even with sanitation, even with plumbing, disease is rife in cities. Anytime you put a bunch of people together in an area, the common cold is going to spread. Unless, of course, you do this in an indigenous animistic sense, because there are massive cities that were here in Turtle Island and Abya that were not centers for disease. In fact, there was not a lot of disease here in Turtle Island and Abya until it was brought, right? In fact, the disease that they accuse on Turtle Islands and Abya, syphilis, actually comes over in 1300 in Spain. So it definitely doesn't come from here, right? So when we're looking at this need to control you, if I can tell you somebody else is the reason, somebody else is the problem, then I can maintain control. I can get you to pay me to protect you. It's a protection racket. It's the mob, right? It's early mob mentality, right? Not mob mentality as a group, but mob mentality as, a mob boss, and his men to keep you in check, right? So we go from the barbarians in the hills to these other nation states. When everybody's in nation states and we're trying to look for ways to kind of internalize this othering, we internalize this othering in ancient Greece between genders. There are 3 biological sexes: male, female, and intersex. Often what you present as sexually is not what your internal or biologically sexually, it's not what your internal organs are sexually. You can appear to be biologically female and have the internal organs of a biological male. This has happened. There's like 3 communities that this is extremely prevalent in. You can also, appear to be biologically male and not be biologically male. And then you can be biologically one or the other of these and have extra genes that slip you sideways one way or the other, and you're not biologically one or the other, but somewhere in between, right? So we start to go based on what we appear to have biological sex, or what our biological sex appears to be. We see this start in ancient Greece. And when we see this start in ancient Greece, they're still not believing that there's only 2 genders, because they have male and female, and then they have man and woman, and then they have prepubescent or young men who are the partners that Greek men prefer at this time, right? And so it is that desire that gives them weight in their othering to other between genders, and decide that the biological perceived sex of female is therefore weaker and must be controlled. And so we start to see othering starting within society or within community. And then when we move on from there, we start to see othering based on religion, things like sin. Thank you for bringing that in right there, Hill. That's a perfect time to die on it, right? So at that point, we start to see othering based on religion when we start to see a singular religion or a single God religion coming into play, right? And it really starts with Constantine. Now, that doesn't mean that the first othering based on religion is absolutely Constantine. The colonization of Canaan is absolutely othering. The belief that God tells you that you can eradicate an entire people, right, is a belief of othering, or is a method of othering, right? So absolutely, the first colonization, the first manifest destiny at 4,000 years ago in Palestine of the Palestinians, right, is absolutely othering, right? And our first othering based on religion. But we start to see this othering based on religion really come into play when we start to see Constantine taking a religion and appropriating it and twisting it into something else, right? A man said, hey, people of my faith, we're doing this wrong. We got to go, we got to do it this way. This is the right way. And you see somebody else come in and appropriate that and take that, right? And in that appropriation, in that taking, what you see is a emperor who wants to be the only one in charge, right? And as long as he wants to be the only one in charge, the way to get there is to discredit the other emperor, because at this point there is at least 2 emperors. I think he had taken it from a triumvirate to a duality at this point. And he's trying to become the sole emperor. The best way to do that is get you to believe in a sole God. Oh, yeah, okay. That one was actually a live ban, so we'll see if it comes back up. Okay. That is under appeal now. I'm going to go ahead and end over here since there's nobody here. Have a great one, everybody.